Hi folks, HR Funk here, with a video that many of you have been waiting for your entire life. And what I'm going to tell you in this video is so revolutionary that I have never seen it before in any other YouTube video in the past. And it's going to be something that people have been struggling with throughout the ages. It's a question that has been tried to be answered many times. And what I'm going to tell you is how to absolutely, positively be guaranteed to never lose a gunfight. But before I tell you that, I want to look at some of the things that people have put forth in the past to try to tackle this issue. So of course, once upon a time, there were no guns, but of course there were still fights. And when firearms were invented, they were revolutionary because for the first time in human history, it was possible to stay outside of the reach of an attacker, or even something that attacker could easily wield, like a club or a sword, and still defend yourself. So very quickly, firearms became popular for both self-defense, and also the military application of firearms became very evident very quickly, and they became very popular for that as well. But it was determined as more and more people started to arm themselves with guns that having only one shot in your gun was really kind of a disadvantage, because if the person who was defending himself missed and the other person that they were trying to defend themselves against didn't miss, then the person that was defending themselves was at a severe disadvantage because it was very slow to reload a gun like this. So the answer to the question pretty quickly became you needed to have a gun with more than one shot in order to never lose a gunfight. So time marched on and technology improved, and eventually guns that fired more than one shot were invented. The so-called repeating firearms allowed the defensive shooter the ability to fire more than one shot in a defensive engagement. So if that defensive shooter missed, or if there was more than one hostile adversary, the defensive shooter could fire more than one shot by simply continuing to cock the action of his gun and continue firing. Then this eventually became the idea as to how to never lose a gunfight. All you had to do was to have a gun that had more than one shot, so that if your adversary only had one shot and he missed, you had plenty more shots that you could use to still defend yourself. So people very quickly began purchasing repeating firearms, and what eventually they found out was still it was possible to lose a gunfight even when using a repeating firearm. So clearly something else was needed. Now, a problem that quickly became apparent with those original repeating firearms was the fact that if the defensive shooter fired all of the ammunition that they had loaded into that particular gun, then it was still very slow to reload. So somewhere around the latter half of the 19th century, the self-contained ammunition cartridge was invented. This had the convenience of being able to be chambered in a repeating firearm, and it was also much faster to reload individual ammunition cartridges than it was for that defensive shooter to reload a cap and ball revolver like I had a moment ago. So suddenly the answer to the question of how to never lose a gunfight became, first, to have a gun that chambered a self-contained ammunition cartridge, and also to have lots and lots of those cartridges. So eventually we saw belts that had cartridge loops come about, and also eventually over the years we saw various mechanical devices that were invented to allow this type of a gun to be reloaded much faster. So again, the answer to how to never lose a gunfight became using a repeating firearm that chambered a self-contained ammunition cartridge. Unfortunately, once again, we still saw people losing gunfights. So again, I say there was clearly something else that needed to be developed in order to make sure someone never lost a gunfight. And that something came about close to the turn of the 19th and 20th century, and that was guns that not only used that self-contained ammunition cartridge, but also each time the trigger was pulled, that gun would automatically extract and eject the fired ammunition case and then chamber and load a new case. And this gave not only a very rapid rate of fire that was possible with this type of a firearm, but also these type of handguns, or these type of guns I should say, used a detachable magazine which conveniently carried those self-contained ammunition cartridges, and if the defensive shooter managed to fire all the cartridges that were in his gun, he could very quickly dump that empty magazine and reload it with an extra magazine. So this clearly was an improvement, and this was most definitely the way to make sure someone would never lose a gunfight. All they had to do is make sure they were armed with just such a gun. Unfortunately, we still saw eventually over time people, even with guns just like this, losing gunfights. So what could possibly be done to improve upon a gun like this? Well, clearly the answer to that question was guns had to be developed that held even more cartridges before they needed to be reloaded. So eventually the 7-round capacity of guns like I showed you a moment ago was replaced with guns that had a much higher capacity, like my Browning High Power here. For the first time, we had a gun that could chamber 13 rounds of ammunition. Now those rounds had to be a little bit smaller, but the very fact that there were so many of them that could be stuffed into the magazine of a gun just like this meant that any reduction on the part of effectiveness from those individual ammunition cartridges was more than made up by the volume of ammunition that could be contained in a gun just like this. So clearly, once again, this was the answer to how to never lose a gunfight. All someone had to do is make sure that they were using a gun that held enough ammunition and they would never ever lose that gunfight. Unfortunately, people with guns just like this still lost gunfights. So we needed something else to be developed again to get us to that point where someone never would lose that gunfight. So all throughout this period of time, there have been people who have proclaimed that the answer to the question lies in rifles and shotguns. Rifles and shotguns generally chamber more effective cartridges than their handgun counterparts, and they're also easier to fire accurately at distance. And we've seen many people over the years who have elected to use firearms similar to this, or shotguns, similar to my 870 back here. And with these firearms, again, they are very effective, but they're also heavier than their handgun counterparts, and they're somewhat unwieldy, especially in tight confines. And again, we still saw people, even with guns just like this, losing gunfights. So it seems like even though they're more effective, the long guns aren't necessarily the answer as to how to make sure you never lose a gunfight. So based on the discussion to this point, it seems that what was needed to ensure someone never would lose a gunfight is a gun that was compact, lightweight, easy to manage in tight spaces, and held a lot of ammunition. And I have an example of that right here, the Glock 19. This is clearly the epitome of gunfighting technology, and even so, we've seen people with guns just like this still lose a gunfight. So apparently, as good as this particular gun is, there's still room for improvement to get us to that point where someone will never lose a gunfight. So maybe the answer to the question doesn't lie in the gun itself, but in the accessories that we attach to that gun. We need to make sure we have the right sight. We need to make sure we have a laser sight. So even if we can't actually shoot, we still have an idea that maybe we can hit something downrange. We need to make sure we have a flashlight attached to our gun so that we have the ability to use that at night to identify targets. And all of this is hopefully going to ensure that we never ever lose a gunfight. Unfortunately, people armed with guns just like this have managed to lose a gunfight. So now we come to the point in the video where I'm going to tell you how to absolutely positively be guaranteed to never lose a gunfight. So ladies and gentlemen, here it is, the answer to this question of the ages, how to be guaranteed to never ever lose a gunfight. And that is to never get into one in the first place. Folks, I've taken kind of a comical approach to dealing with this topic. It's something that's been on my mind for a while, and it comes about as a result of YouTube videos and comments that I've received and things that I've read and one thing and another. And truthfully, it's something that goes back a long, long time. I think there is a segment of the firearms owning community out there that believes if you buy just the right gun and you load it with just the right ammunition and you equip it with just the right accessories and you carry it in just the right manner and you deploy it using just the right technique, that you are absolutely positively guaranteed to always win a gunfight. I liken this to the people out there who seem to believe that if you figure out just the right combination of things that you should eat and you shouldn't eat, or you should drink and you shouldn't drink, that you will never die. I think both types of thinking are equally flawed. And I also wanted to throw this out because for those of you who might be new to firearms, beware the people that want to sell you absolutes. The people that want to tell you this is the type of gun you have to buy, or these are the type of accessories you have to buy, or this is the type of ammunition, or this is the type of carry method, or whatever. Now, that doesn't mean that I think you should approach this in a haphazard or whimsical manner. Obviously, if you are selecting a firearm for personal protection, that is a very important choice. So try to gain some knowledge, try to speak to people who are truly knowledgeable. Beware the absolutes out there. I always say, and I echo this, being a Star Wars fan, that a Sith speaks in absolutes. You know, the people that want to guarantee you that this or that is the absolute positive best way to ensure that you're always going to prevail in a defensive encounter is probably somebody I would be a little leery of taking advice from. And that's the video for today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments, as always, make sure you forward those to me. Remember, if you purchase anything from Optics Planet, be sure to use my discount code, which is... And if you use that discount code, it's good for 5% off anything you purchase from Optics Planet. Also remember, WarbirdBunker.com is making t-shirts for the channel, and there are some new t-shirts and some stickers on WarbirdBunker.com, so go there and check those out. And if you use my discount code at WarbirdBunker.com, which is HRFunk4U, that'll get you 10% off anything you purchase from WarbirdBunker.com. See you next time, folks. And until then, good shooting. Bye-bye.